A Netflix documentary made me realize my entire life was a lie. I was halfway through a new true crime documentary when I saw my father on screen, walking through the background of crime scene footage from 20 years ago. "Dad, you need to see this right now," I called out, pausing the screen on his face. He walked into the living room, and the second he saw himself on TV, his face went white. "Pack your things, Lee. We have 10 minutes before they realize we're blown," he said in a voice I'd never heard him use before. "What are you talking about?" My heart was slamming against my ribs because my boring suburban father was on TV at a murder scene from 20 years ago. He was already yanking photos off the walls and throwing them into the fireplace. My mother came out of her office looking annoyed until she saw his face. "They aired the footage," was all he said, and she immediately ran upstairs. I heard drawers slamming while I stood frozen, watching my dad pour lighter fluid on our family photos. "Stop standing there and get your emergency bag from under your bed," he said. And that's when I noticed the pistol in his hand. My legs felt like water as I ran upstairs and found a bag under my bed that I'd never known was there before. Already packed with clothes and cash and a passport with my picture but a different name. Madison Charleston. There were also car keys to a vehicle I didn't recognize and a burner phone still in its packaging. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely zip it back up. "I'm not going anywhere until you tell me what's happening," I said, my voice cracking. My dad looked at his watch and then at my mom, who was suddenly in the doorway with 3 duffel bags. "Your real name is Madison Charleston, and we've been in witness protection since you were 5 years old," he said while the photos curled into black ash. The words didn't make sense, but the weapon in his hand was real, and the terror in my mother's eyes was real, and my entire life was apparently fake. "This can't be real," I said, backing against the wall. "We live in Ohio and you work at State Farm and Mom teaches piano lessons." My dad actually laughed, but it sounded bitter and wrong. "I haven't worked a day at State Farm and your mother hasn't touched a piano since we got here. Those are just the stories we tell people." My mom was stuffing ammunition boxes into one of the duffel bags like this was completely normal. "The piano students who come here are federal agents checking in on us," she said without looking up. My mother's phone rang and she answered in a harsh, guttural language, then switched to English. "Handlers compromised. We're on our own. They killed Tyson an hour ago." My dad swore and pulled a revolver from inside the cereal box. Everything felt like a movie happening to someone else as I watched my suburban dad check the ammunition like he'd done it 1,000 times. "How long until they get here?" he asked my mom. 20 minutes if we're lucky, 5 if we're not," she replied, and then looked at me. "Can you shoot?" I shook my head and she pressed a knife into my hand instead. "Then you carry this and stay between us no matter what happens. Someone leaked that footage on purpose because they've been looking for us," my dad explained while my mom backed the car into the garage. "I testified against the Serbian mob about those murders. They think I died that day with the rest of the Ansel family, but I survived and helped put them in prison. Now they know I'm alive." The documentary was still paused on his face and I wanted to throw up. "But why did you testify?" I asked, and his jaw tightened. "Because I helped them launder money for 5 years and I knew where all the bodies were buried. The law gave me a choice and I chose to keep you safe." My phone started buzzing with texts from my best friend, but my dad grabbed it and snapped it in half, then threw it in the fire. I watched my best friend's messages disappear into flames along with every photo of my fake childhood. Lee Lane was already dead, and I was Madison Charleston now, someone I didn't even know how to be. "Will they hurt my friends?" I asked, suddenly terrified for everyone I knew. "They only want us," my mom said, but she didn't sound completely sure. The doorbell rang and my parents both raised their weapons. "I know you're in there, Wade," a man called out with an accent that made my mom grab my arm hard enough to bruise. "Netflix is amazing, isn't it? My nephew called me 20 minutes ago about the documentary. He recognized you immediately, and then we checked your daughter's Instagram. So many helpful photos with location tags." My stomach dropped because I had posted a picture from our front porch just yesterday. My mom was pulling out a Glock from her purse like it belonged there. The man outside laughed and said something in Serbian to someone else. "Come out and we'll make this quick, or we can burn the house down with you inside like we should have done 20 years ago." My normal Tuesday had turned into a nightmare and I couldn't stop shaking. "How many?" my dad whispered to my mom. She peeked through the blinds and held up 4 fingers, then pointed up and held up 2 more. 6 people had come to kill us. "When I open the garage door, you drive straight through whatever's in front of us," my dad told me, pushing me into the driver's seat even though I'd only had my license for 3 months. And that's when I saw the black SUVs blocking both ends of our street. My dad hit the garage door opener and I slammed my foot down on the gas pedal before the door was even halfway up. The car shot forward and smashed through the bottom half of the door, and I felt wood and metal scraping across the roof and hood as we burst into the driveway. The black SUVs were right there, one blocking the left side of the street and one blocking the right, and I could see men in dark clothes turning toward us with guns in their hands. My dad was yelling at me to turn right now, and my mom twisted in her seat and fired 2 shots out her window toward the SUV on the left. The sound inside the car was so loud it hurt my ears and I screamed but kept my foot on the gas. I cranked the steering wheel as hard as I could to the right, and the car jumped over the curb into our neighbor's front yard. The lawn was soft from yesterday's rain and the car bounced hard, throwing us all against our seatbelts. I could see Mrs. Patterson's garden gnomes in front of me, and I drove straight through them, sending little ceramic pieces flying everywhere. My mom fired another shot, and I heard glass breaking somewhere behind us. My dad was pointing toward the space between two houses where the greenbelt started, and I aimed for it even though there was a white picket fence in the way. Bullets hit the back window and the glass exploded inward, covering the back seat with tiny pieces. I was screaming and crying, but somehow my hands stayed on the wheel and my foot stayed on the gas. The car hit the fence and wood splintered everywhere, and then we were bouncing down a steep slope into the drainage area. The car bottomed out hard and something metal scraped underneath, making a horrible grinding sound. My dad pointed to a concrete tunnel opening and I drove toward it, the car sliding sideways in the mud. We made it maybe 20 feet into the tunnel before the car got stuck on something and the wheels just spun uselessly. My dad yelled for us to get out and run, and I grabbed my emergency bag and threw open the door. The tunnel was dark and smelled like sewage and old water, and I could hear shouting in Serbian coming from behind us. My mom grabbed my arm and pulled me forward into the darkness, and we started running. The knife she had given me was still in my other hand, and I gripped it so hard my fingers hurt. My lungs were burning after just a few seconds because I'm not a runner and I've never been this scared in my entire life. We were splashing through water that came up to our ankles, and it was so dark I couldn't see anything except the tiny flashlight my dad was holding. Behind us, the shouting got louder, and I heard at least 2 different voices echoing through the tunnel. My dad suddenly pulled us sideways into a concrete alcove I hadn't even seen, and we pressed ourselves against the cold, wet wall. I was trying so hard to control my breathing, but my chest was heaving, and I thought for sure they would hear us. My mom had her gun raised toward the tunnel opening we'd just come from, and my dad was covering the other direction with his revolver. The footsteps got closer, and I heard men talking in that harsh language, and then a flashlight beam swept past our hiding spot. I held my breath and squeezed my eyes shut like that would somehow make me invisible. The footsteps passed right by us, so close I could smell cigarette smoke on someone's clothes. The voices moved away down the tunnel and I started to breathe again, but then they came back. The searchers walked past our alcove a second time, and I heard one of them say something that made the others laugh. The water sounds and the echoes seemed to confuse them about exactly where we were hiding. After what felt like hours, but was probably only 10 minutes, the voices faded away completely. My dad waited another minute, then signaled us to move deeper into the drainage system, away from where the searchers had gone. We walked for what felt like forever through the dark tunnels, taking turns whenever my dad indicated. Finally, we reached a different exit that came out in someone's backyard 6 blocks from our house. We climbed out covered in mud and dirty water, and I was shaking so hard I could barely stand. My mom pulled out the burner phone and made a call, speaking in English this time. She said we needed immediate pickup and our handler was dead, then gave an address I didn't recognize. When she hung up, she told my dad she was going alone to get the backup car from a storage unit, and she'd meet us at the gas station on Miller Road in 20 minutes. My dad tried to argue, but she was already running toward the street. My dad and I hid behind a dumpster at a closed gas station, crouching in the shadows while he kept checking his watch. This was the first moment we'd had to actually breathe since I paused that documentary. I looked at my dad and realized he wasn't the boring insurance agent anymore. He was someone who knew how to run and hide and shoot, and that person had always been there under the surface. His hands were steady on his gun, and his eyes kept scanning the street like he'd done this 1,000 times before. 20 minutes later, my mom pulled up in an old Civic I'd never seen, and we jumped in with our bags. She'd changed into different clothes and had a baseball cap pulled down low over her face. She looked nothing like the woman who taught piano lessons and made cookies for her students last week. As we drove away from our neighborhood, my dad finally started explaining everything. He talked about the Ansel family murders and how he helped the Serbian mob launder money through real estate deals for 5 years. He said there were bodies buried in construction sites around the city, and he kept detailed records of every transaction and every murder he knew about. Those records put 15 people in prison after he testified. I was sitting in the back seat realizing my father was both a criminal and the reason those criminals went to jail. The story he was telling didn't match the dad who helped me with my math homework and took me to soccer practice. I interrupted him and said that my Instagram post from yesterday showed our front porch, and I had the location tag turned on. The silence in the car after I said that was worse than any yelling could have been. I watched my mom's hands get tight on the steering wheel, and my dad closed his eyes like I'd just punched him in the stomach. My mom checked the rearview mirror for the 3rd time in 2 minutes, and her jaw got tight. She told us there was an SUV 3 cars back that had followed us through 4 different turns. My dad twisted around to look, but she snapped at him to face forward because we couldn't let them know we'd spotted them. My stomach dropped because I thought we'd gotten away clean. Mom suddenly cranked the wheel right, and we shot into a shopping center parking lot so fast the tires squealed. She wove between parked cars like she was playing a video game, cutting across empty spots and around light poles. I grabbed the door handle and held on while she aimed for a narrow gap between 2 buildings. The service alley was barely wide enough for our car, and I heard something scrape against the passenger side. We burst out onto a different street, and Mom floored it, checking the mirror again. The SUV tried to follow us into the alley, but it was too wide and got stuck between the buildings. I looked back and saw it reversing while the driver's door opened. We merged onto the highway and immediately hit stop traffic. Cars were packed bumper to bumper and nobody was moving. Mom didn't even slow down. She jerked the wheel and drove onto the shoulder, squeezing between the concrete barrier and the line of cars. Our side mirror hit the barrier and exploded into pieces of glass and plastic. The grinding sound made my teeth hurt. I looked out my window and saw angry drivers yelling at us as we passed. Then I saw the SUV again 2 lanes over, stuck in the same traffic we were bypassing. The driver had his phone pressed to his ear and his mouth was moving fast. My dad said they were calling the others to coordinate and we needed to get off this highway now. Mom took the next exit doing 50 miles per hour and the car tilted sideways. I thought we were going to flip, but somehow the tires held. My dad pulled out the burner phone and dialed a number with shaking fingers. He asked for the U.S. and Marshals Service duty line and then said something that sounded like a password. The words came out smooth like he'd practiced them 1,000 times. He explained that their witness protection family was blown and handler Tyson was dead, and they needed immediate help. A woman's voice came through the speaker asking him to verify his identity code. He rattled off numbers and letters while Mom took random turns through a residential neighborhood. The woman said her name was Marshal Nora Lee, and she would call back in 5 minutes after verification. The phone went dead and my dad stared at it like he could make it ring faster. Mom pulled into a gas station and the car finally stopped moving. My hands were cramping from holding the door handle so tight. Mom reached into the back seat and shoved a hoodie at me, then handed me a pair of sunglasses even though the sun was setting. She told me to put them on right now and keep my head down. My dad got out to pump gas and I watched him scan every person at the other pumps. His hand stayed near his waistband where I knew he had the gun tucked. A woman walked past our car and my dad's whole body tensed until she got in her own vehicle and drove away. I realized we couldn't use credit cards or debit cards or anything that would show up in a computer somewhere. We couldn't call anyone or check social media or do any of the normal things that left digital footprints. We were completely disconnected from the world I knew. The burner phone rang and my dad answered it before the first ring finished. Marshal Nora Lee gave him an address for a library in the next town. She said we needed to meet her there in 40 minutes. She told him to vary his speed and take different routes, and if he spotted another tail, he should abort and call her with a new meeting point. My dad repeated the address back to her twice to make sure he had it right. When he hung up, he programmed the address into an old GPS unit from the glove box instead of using a phone. Mom finished pumping gas and paid cash inside while my dad and I sat in the car watching every vehicle that pulled in. A black sedan parked 3 spaces away, and my dad's hand moved to his gun until a family with little kids got out. I was seeing threats everywhere now, and I hated it. During the drive, Mom started talking without looking at either of us. She said she was never actually a piano teacher before witness protection. Those weekly students who came to our house were federal agents doing check-ins disguised as lessons. She used to work in private security overseas, which is why she knew how to shoot and speak Serbian and drive like we were in an action movie. My dad added that they met on a protection detail in Eastern Europe, and that was the only true thing about their relationship we'd ever been told. Every single story about how they met and fell in love was fake. Every anniversary celebration was based on a lie. I sat in the back seat realizing I didn't actually know my parents at all. The people I'd lived with for 17 years were strangers wearing my parents' faces. We reached the library parking lot exactly 40 minutes after the call. A plain gray sedan was parked near the entrance with someone sitting in the driver's seat. My dad told us to stay in the car while he approached alone. He walked slowly with his hands visible and stopped a few feet from the sedan. A black woman in her 40s got out wearing a blazer and khaki pants. She looked like a teacher or a businesswoman. Nothing like what I expected a U.S. Marshal to look like. She asked my dad something and he started reciting details that sounded like dates and places and names. She nodded and gestured for us to join them. Up close, I could see she had gray streaks in her hair and tired eyes. She introduced herself as Marshal Nora Lee and shook hands with my mom. Then she looked at me and said, "I must be Madison." Hearing my real name out loud from a stranger made me feel dizzy. Nora told us handler Tyson was found shot in his apartment 3 hours ago. 2 bullets to the head, execution style. She said it looked professional and the crime scene was clean. Nora explained that someone inside the documentary production company leaked information about the footage before it aired. The mob had time to prepare and coordinate the attack on our house. She said the Marshals Service was investigating the leak, but right now her only priority was keeping us alive. She needed us to follow her to a temporary safe house while they figured out next steps. My dad asked how long we'd have to stay there and she said she didn't know yet. Everything depended on what the investigation turned up and whether they caught the people hunting us. She told us to get our bags and transfer them to her sedan. My dad hesitated and I saw him touch the gun under his jacket. Nora's eyes tracked the movement and her expression hardened. She told him he needed to surrender the weapon before they went any further. My dad said absolutely not, and his voice got loud. He argued that the gun was the only thing keeping us alive and he wasn't giving it up to anyone. Nora said she couldn't transport armed civilians and it was against policy. They went back and forth getting angrier, and I saw my mom step between them. She pointed out that Nora was literally our only lifeline right now, and we couldn't afford to lose federal protection over a gun. My dad looked at her like she'd betrayed him. Then I heard my own voice saying we should trust her because we didn't have any other options. Both my parents turned to stare at me. I said the mob had already found us once and they'd find us again if we tried to run on our own. At least with Nora, we had resources and information and a plan. My dad's shoulders dropped and he slowly pulled the gun from his waistband. He handed it to Nora Grip first, and she secured it in a lockbox in her trunk. The safe house turned out to be a motel room that smelled like cigarettes and cleaning chemicals. Bars covered the windows and the view showed a dumpster and a brick wall. Nora explained the rules while we stood in the doorway with our bags. We couldn't use our phones or contact anyone we knew or leave without her approval. She would be in the connecting room with the door cracked open. If we needed anything, we knocked on the connecting door. We didn't go outside. She asked if we understood, and we all nodded. My dad asked about food, and she said she'd order delivery, but we had to stay away from the windows when it arrived. She handed my mom a burner phone with only her number programmed in. Then she went into the connecting room and I heard the lock click. I looked around at the dingy furniture and stained carpet and realized this was my life now. No home, no friends, no identity, just a motel room with bars on the windows and a federal agent guarding the door. That night, I couldn't sleep on the scratchy bedspread that smelled like old smoke and chemical cleaner. My parents were in the other bed whispering to each other in harsh voices that cut through the darkness, and I could hear my dad saying something about protection, and my mom responding with angry words about trust. I stared at the water stains on the ceiling and felt something building inside me that was bigger than fear or confusion. My dad's voice got louder and he said they had kept secrets to protect me, that I was safer not knowing the truth about who we really were. That's when I sat up in bed and my voice came out harder than I expected. I told him that protection through lies just made everything worse, that I had posted location tags on Instagram because nobody taught me I was living under a fake identity. The room went silent and I could feel both of them staring at me in the dark. My mom started to say something, but I cut her off and told them I deserved to know the truth about everything from now on, no matter how scary or complicated it was. I said I was the one who accidentally led killers to our house, and I needed to make informed decisions instead of being treated like a little kid who couldn't handle reality. My dad sat up and I saw his silhouette against the window bars. My mom reached across and touched his arm, and something passed between them that I couldn't see but could feel. They both nodded, and my dad said they would be honest going forward, that they owed me that much after everything that had happened. My mom promised no more secrets, and her voice cracked a little when she said it. Around midnight, I heard movement in the connecting room, and then Nora knocked quietly on our door. My dad was up instantly with his hand reaching for where his gun used to be, and Nora came in holding one of our duffel bags with a small device in her other hand. She told us we needed to move right now because she had found a GPS tracker sewn into the lining of the bag, which meant someone had been tracking our location the whole time. My stomach dropped and I was pulling on my shoes before my brain even caught up with what was happening. We grabbed what we could carry and left the tracked bag sitting on the motel bed, and I wondered how long the people hunting us had known exactly where we were. Nora's sedan was parked behind the building, and we piled in with even less than we had before, just the clothes on our backs, and the emergency cash my parents had saved. Nora told me to get in the driver's seat, and I looked at her like she was crazy, because I had only been driving for 3 months and barely knew how to parallel park. She said I needed to practice evasive driving under her instruction, and that sitting in the passenger seat was the best way to teach me. My hands were already sweating when I gripped the steering wheel and started the engine. Nora directed me onto back roads and told me to vary my speed randomly, sometimes going 10 over the limit and sometimes dropping to 5 under. She made me take unexpected turns without signaling and told me to watch my mirrors constantly for any vehicle that followed our pattern. I was scared of screwing up, but also grateful she was treating me like I could handle real responsibility instead of just being protected and lied to. Every time I checked the rearview mirror, my heart jumped thinking I would see headlights following us. We were on a dark rural road with no streetlights when I heard a loud bang and the car lurched hard to the right. The steering wheel jerked out of my hands and we were sliding sideways on gravel, and Nora was yelling at me to turn into the slide, but my brain was frozen. The car went off the road and down into a shallow ditch, slamming to a stop against a fence post. My mom's head hit the window with a crack that made me scream, and I saw blood running down her forehead in the dim dashboard light. My dad was already unbuckling and climbing into the back seat while Nora called someone on her phone asking for a backup vehicle immediately. I grabbed the emergency kit from under my seat and my hands were shaking, so hard I could barely open it. My dad pressed gauze against my mom's bleeding scalp and told me to hold it there with pressure while he checked her pupils with his phone flashlight. My mom was conscious and talking, which seemed like a good sign, and she told me I was doing great even though I was crying and my hands were covered in her blood. Nora finished her call and came around to help, checking my mom's head wound and saying it looked worse than it was, but we needed to get it cleaned properly. While we waited on the side of that dark road, Nora explained some things my parents probably should have told me years ago. She said my dad's original testimony deal had expired a long time ago, and he wasn't technically under active protection anymore. The Marshal Service had moved on to other cases, and we were basically on our own until the documentary blew everything up again. She told my dad that if he cooperated with the current investigation into Handler Tyson's murder and the documentary leak, they could negotiate a new arrangement. But there would be legal consequences he couldn't avoid for his original crimes, and he might have to testify again in court. My dad nodded and said he understood, that keeping us safe was more important than staying out of jail. I kept pressure on my mom's cut and felt the gauze getting warm and wet under my fingers. I asked Nora what life in permanent witness protection actually looked like because I needed to know what I was signing up for. She didn't sugarcoat it or make it sound better than it was. She said it meant new names forever and no contact with anyone from our past, not friends or extended family or anyone we used to know. She said we would live with constant low-level paranoia about being discovered, always watching over our shoulders and never fully trusting anyone. Some families adjusted well and built new lives that felt normal after a while. Requested Reds is on Spotify now. Check out link in the description or comments. Other families fell apart from the stress and ended up divorced or estranged because the pressure was too much. She said the success rate depended on whether everyone could commit to the restrictions and follow the rules without breaking. I thought about never talking to my best friend again or going to my high school graduation, and it felt like mourning someone who was still alive. The backup vehicle arrived about 40 minutes later, a different sedan with government plates. We transferred our minimal belongings, and my mom limped on her sore ankle while my dad supported her weight. The new motel was in a different town whose name I didn't catch, and by the time we got there, I was so exhausted I could barely stand. The room looked exactly like the last one with the same scratchy bedspreads and the same smell of smoke and chemicals. Before I collapsed into bed, I checked that my mom's cut had stopped bleeding, peeling back the gauze carefully to see the edges of the wound. She squeezed my hand and said she was proud of how I was handling this impossible situation, and I wanted to believe her, but mostly I just felt numb. The next morning, I woke up to Nora shaking my shoulder and showing me her phone screen. Someone had posted on social media claiming to be at our old house, with photos of the burned front lawn and yellow police tape across what used to be our driveway. The attackers were publicly interacting with the post using their real accounts, leaving comments and likes like they weren't even trying to hide. Nora said this showed they were confident enough to operate in the open, that they didn't fear law enforcement or consequences. I stared at the photos of my destroyed home and felt something twist in my chest. Everything I owned was gone. Every piece of evidence that I had lived there as Lee Lane for 12 years. I had an idea and told Nora that maybe we could work backward from the documentary to figure out who leaked the information in the first place. She looked at me with something like respect in her eyes and said I was thinking strategically, which was exactly what we needed. She explained that the Marshal Service was already investigating the leak, but having the family's perspective might help connect dots they were missing. She made a call to her supervisor and got permission for me to contact the production company under monitored conditions. I would have to be careful about what I said and stick to questions about the footage chain of custody, but at least I could do something useful instead of just hiding and running. Nora handed me a clean phone and pulled up the production company's number, and I took a deep breath before dialing. The phone rang 3 times before a woman answered with a tired hello, and I stumbled through explaining who I was and why I was calling. She went completely silent for about 10 seconds, and then I heard her voice crack when she said she was so sorry, that she had no idea the documentary would put anyone in danger. Gemma started talking fast about how the crime scene footage came from police archives, and went through their standard process where they blur all faces before it goes to air, but someone must have gotten to the original unblurred version before the editing team processed it. She sounded genuinely upset and kept apologizing while I sat there holding Nora's phone and trying to figure out if this information actually helped us. Nora gestured for me to put it on speaker, and Gemma explained that the footage went through 3 different editing houses before final production, which meant at least a dozen people had access to the raw files at various points. She promised to send Nora the complete chain of custody documentation for that specific piece of footage, and I could hear her typing while she talked, like she was already pulling up the records. When I hung up, I felt worse instead of better because now I knew exactly how many opportunities there were for someone to leak our location. I looked at Nora and admitted that I was the one who made it easy for them anyway, because I posted my location on Instagram all the time, including a picture from our front porch just yesterday. Nora set down her coffee and told me that yes, I made a mistake, but I was 17, and the adults in my life should have taught me better about keeping our location private, so the blame wasn't entirely mine to carry. My dad came out of the bathroom looking pale and asked what the producer said, and my mom was sitting on the bed rewrapping her ankle with fresh bandages. Nora laid out a plan to bring us into the federal courthouse where we would be secure while they worked with local police and the FBI to coordinate our protection. My dad immediately tensed up and said he didn't like the idea of going into any government building because it felt like surrendering control of the situation. My mom looked at him and pointed out that control was an illusion we lost the moment that documentary aired on Netflix, and we needed to accept help from people who actually knew what they were doing. We packed up our stuff again and loaded into Nora's sedan with me driving, because she said I needed more practice with evasive maneuvers. The freeway was busy with morning traffic, and I was trying to stay calm while merging into the middle lane when 2 vehicles suddenly appeared on both sides of us. Nora recognized it immediately as a coordinated attack and started giving me rapid instructions to accelerate into a gap between cars ahead. I pushed the gas pedal down and squeezed through a space that barely looked wide enough, hearing metal scrape as both side mirrors got ripped off against the other cars. One of the attacking vehicles tried to follow but clipped another car and spun out across 2 lanes, and Nora was already on her radio calling for immediate police response to our location. The second attacking vehicle was still right behind us, and Nora told me to take the next exit onto a construction zone, where the narrow lanes and barriers would make it harder for them to maneuver. I took the exit doing 60 miles per hour and nearly lost control on the gravel shoulder, the car fishtailing before I managed to straighten it out and keep moving forward. We were weaving between orange construction equipment and concrete barriers when I heard gunshots hit the back of our car. Nora rolled down her window and returned fire while shouting at me to keep driving, and I was crying and driving and praying all at the same time because this was actually happening and I could die right now. My mom was in the back seat with her gun drawn covering the other side, and my dad was trying to reload his pistol with shaking hands. I saw an opening into a half-finished housing development and swerved into it without thinking, the car bouncing violently over rough dirt roads between wooden frames that would eventually be houses. The pursuing vehicle tried to follow, but their tires couldn't grip the soft mud, and they got stuck about 50 yards behind us. Nora yelled for us to abandon the car and run, so I slammed on the brakes and we all jumped out and sprinted toward the nearest unfinished house. My mom's ankle gave out as we were climbing through a window frame, and she went down hard with a scream that made my heart stop. My dad and I grabbed her arms and dragged her into a bathroom that was just framed in wooden studs with no walls or fixtures yet. Nora positioned herself at the doorway with her weapon drawn and her phone out calling for backup, and I could hear our attackers shouting to each other somewhere in the development. The voices got louder and I could hear boots crunching through construction debris somewhere close by. My mom's breathing was fast and shallow next to me, and my dad kept his gun pointed at the doorway opening while Nora pulled out her phone. She spoke quietly into it, giving an address I didn't recognize and saying her federal badge number. Then she looked at all three of us and her face was serious. "If they start shooting, we stay flat on the ground no matter what," she said, and I nodded even though my whole body was shaking. The footsteps were coming from 2 different directions now, and I pressed myself harder against the wooden studs, trying to make myself smaller. Someone shouted in Serbian from what sounded like the next building over, and another voice answered from somewhere behind us. Nora shifted her position and raised her weapon toward the empty doorway, her finger resting along the side of the gun instead of on the trigger. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears, and the knife handle was slippery with sweat in my palm. The attackers were checking each unfinished structure methodically, and we were running out of time before they reached ours. A shadow moved past the window frame and my mom grabbed my arm to keep me still. Then boots hit the floor inside our building and Nora fired 2 shots straight up through the open ceiling that echoed so loud my ears rang. The attackers started yelling and returned fire, but the bullets hit wooden studs and concrete in weird places because the empty building made all the sounds bounce around confusing. Nora fired 1 more shot toward the doorway and I heard someone curse in Serbian and scramble backward. Then police sirens cut through the air getting louder fast, and the attackers were suddenly running away from us instead of toward us. Car doors slammed and engines revved and tires spun in the mud, and within seconds I heard different vehicles arriving with more sirens. Nora told us to stay put while she checked the situation, and she moved to the window opening with her badge held up high. Police were spreading out through the construction site in tactical formation, and I watched one officer tackle a man who wasn't running fast enough. The guy went down hard with his face in the dirt, and 3 officers swarmed him with handcuffs and relief hit me so strong that my legs gave out, and I slid down the wall shaking. My mom wrapped her arms around me, and my dad finally lowered his weapon, and we just sat there in the dusty bathroom that wasn't really a bathroom while police secured the area outside. A detective in a suit jacket showed up 20 minutes later and separated us for interviews. He introduced himself as Detective Carpenter, and his face made it clear he wasn't happy about federal witness drama landing in his jurisdiction. He asked me to walk him through everything from the documentary to right now, and I could tell from his questions that he thought maybe we weren't telling him the whole truth about being victims. When I explained about my dad testifying 20 years ago, Detective Carpenter wanted to know exactly what crimes my dad committed before he testified. I told him about the money laundering and helping hide bodies, and I watched his expression get harder. He asked if there was anything else we were hiding, and if we had any idea how many people might still be trying to kill us. I said I didn't know, and that was the honest truth because 2 days ago I thought my dad sold insurance. Nora came into the interview room and vouched for us, pulling out her phone to show Detective Carpenter the evidence trail. She walked him through Handler Tyson's murder and the documentary leak and the coordinated attacks today, laying it all out in a way that made the connections obvious. Detective Carpenter studied the information and his jaw was tight, but he finally agreed to help. He said he'd secure us in a courthouse holding room while the Marshal's service figured out the long-term plan, and I could tell he still didn't fully trust us, but at least he was willing to help keep us alive. They drove us to the courthouse in separate vehicles and put us in a small room with a table and chairs that reminded me of TV shows about interrogations. Nora sat down across from us and said she had an idea about using the detained attacker's phone to send a message that might draw out the others. My dad immediately said it was too risky, and we should just focus on getting relocated somewhere safe. I surprised myself by speaking up and saying we were already at maximum risk, so we might as well try to take some control. Nora looked at me with something like approval, and my dad rubbed his face with both hands. I pointed out that running away hadn't worked so far, and maybe it was time to be strategic instead of just reactive. My mom agreed with me, and my dad finally nodded, and Nora started explaining her plan in more detail. I volunteered right away to be the one to deliver whatever message they needed, and Nora's response was immediate and firm. She said absolutely not, and when I argued that I was already involved and wanted to help, she didn't budge. Putting a minor in operational danger was a line she wouldn't cross no matter what, and even though I was frustrated, I had to respect that she had boundaries. My dad looked relieved, and my mom squeezed my hand like she was proud I'd offered, but also glad Nora had refused. Instead, Nora pulled up my old Instagram account on her tablet, and we worked together to create a story post with a fake location. We picked a coffee shop across town and made it look like I was there right now, using an old photo from my camera roll that didn't have obvious date markers. Nora's team was monitoring for any suspicious activity near that location, and we watched the view count on the story tick up slowly. My hands were shaking as I watched because this felt like using myself as bait even though I wasn't physically there. Within 40 minutes, the views jumped up fast, and Nora got a call from one of her team members. A vehicle matching the attacker's description had just pulled into the coffee shop parking lot, and surveillance cameras got clear photos of the license plate. Detective Carpenter came back into the holding room and said he was getting a warrant to pull the rental records, and I felt a weird mix of scared and proud that our plan had actually worked. The license plate traced back to a rental company downtown, and within another 20 minutes, Detective Carpenter had the name on the rental agreement and was coordinating with other agencies to find out who was coordinating all these attacks. My phone buzzed in my pocket, and I jumped before remembering it was the burner phone from my emergency bag, not my real phone that my dad had destroyed. Nora took it from me and answered, then handed it over, saying it was producer Gemma calling back. Gemma's voice was tight with guilt as she said she was willing to delay the next episode of the documentary and add warnings about unintended consequences. It felt like such a small thing compared to everything that had happened, but at least it was something. I thanked her and said I understood she didn't mean for any of this to happen, and she promised to cooperate fully with the investigation into who leaked the footage. When I hung up, I realized it was the first time in 2 days that something had gone even slightly right, and even though it couldn't undo the damage, it felt like one tiny piece of this nightmare was addressed. I checked the burner phone for the third time in 10 minutes, and still no messages from Nora or Detective Carpenter about what's happening at our old house. My mom sits across from me at the motel table with her hands folded, and I can see she's doing that thing where she counts her breaths to stay calm. The phone finally buzzes, and I nearly drop it grabbing for it, but it's just a text from Nora saying she's getting updates from the fire department. My dad paces between the window and the door, checking the parking lot every 30 seconds like someone might materialize out of nowhere. The room smells like old cigarettes and cleaning chemicals, and I keep thinking about my bedroom at home with the posters on the walls and my collection of concert tickets taped above my desk. Another buzz, and this time it's actual news. Detective Carpenter sending photos through an encrypted app that Nora set up for us. The first photo shows our street blocked off with fire trucks and police cars everywhere. And the second photo makes my stomach drop because our house is just a burned shell with the roof collapsed and black smoke still rising from what used to be the garage. I hand the phone to my mom and watch her face go completely blank as she scrolls through the images. Then she passes it to my dad, who just stares at the screen for a long time without saying anything. Everything I owned except what's in this emergency bag is gone now. Every photo album my parents didn't burn themselves. Every piece of clothing in my closet. My laptop with all my schoolwork. The stuffed elephant I've had since I was actually 5 years old. I think about my yearbooks with everyone's signatures and inside jokes written in the margins, and how those were proof that Lee Lane existed even if she was fake, and now there's nothing left. My dad sits down heavily on the bed and puts his head in his hands, and I realize this isn't just about losing our stuff. It's about losing the life we pretended to have for 12 years. The attackers burned it down on purpose to erase us, to make sure we understood they could destroy everything we built, and it worked, because I feel erased right now. Detective Carpenter calls instead of texting, and Nora puts him on speaker so we can all hear. He says the warrant came through faster than expected because of Handler Tyson's murder being linked to our case, and his team searched a storage unit rented under one of the attackers' names about 2 hours ago. Inside, they found camping equipment, food supplies, multiple burner phones still in packaging, ammunition boxes, a laptop with surveillance photos and printed maps of our neighborhood, with our house circled in red marker. He says it looks like they were planning to stake out the area for weeks if necessary, waiting for the right moment to attack, and they had backup plans written out in Serbian that his translator is still working through. The laptop had browser history showing they'd been monitoring my Instagram account for the past month, screenshotting every post I made and noting the locations I tagged. There's a printed photo of our family that I recognize from a post I made at a restaurant 3 weeks ago, and someone drew X marks over my parents' faces in red pen. Detective Carpenter's voice gets quieter when he describes a notebook filled with details about our daily routines. What time my dad left for his fake job at State Farm. What time my mom's fake piano students arrived. What time I got home from the school. They knew everything about us because I posted everything about us, and the level of planning they put into killing us makes me feel sick. My mom reaches over and squeezes my hand when she sees my face, and I appreciate it, but I also know this is my fault no matter what Nora said about operational security. The laptop data led to phone records that Detective Carpenter's tech people traced to 3 more associates, and he says 2 of them got arrested this morning trying to leave the state. They're being held without bail on conspiracy charges, and the detective thinks they'll flip on each other pretty quickly once they realize how much evidence there is. But he also says the leader, Alex Yates, isn't among the arrested people, and his name doesn't appear on any of the phone records or rental agreements they've found so far. Nora leans forward and asks if they've identified Yates through other means, and Detective Carpenter confirms he's the nephew who originally recognized my dad from the documentary based on social media posts the nephew made bragging about it. The nephew posted a screenshot of the documentary with my dad circled and wrote something in Serbian that translates to "finally found the rat," and that post got shared to several accounts connected to the Serbian organization. But Yates himself is smart enough not to use traceable phones or put his name on anything official, and he's likely the one giving orders while staying completely off the grid. My dad asks how dangerous Yates is compared to the others, and Detective Carpenter pauses before saying that Yates has a record in Serbia for violent enforcement and was suspected in at least 3 murders before he came to the United States 5 years ago. The silence in our motel room after that information is heavy, and I watch my dad's jaw clench like he's trying not to show how scared he is. Nora says the good news is that with most of his team arrested, Yates is running out of resources and backup, which might make him either more desperate or more careful. Nora ends the call with Detective Carpenter and sits down with my dad at the table, and I can tell from her expression this is going to be a serious conversation. She explains that the current investigation into Handler Tyson's murder and the attacks on us has created an opportunity for my dad to cooperate as a witness again, which could lead to a new witness protection arrangement for our family. But she's very clear that this cooperation would also mean my dad has to answer questions about his original money laundering activities, and there might be additional charges or consequences he avoided the first time around. The federal prosecutors want a complete accounting of everything he did during those 5 years working for the Serbian mob, including details he might have left out of his original testimony. My dad looks older than I've ever seen him as he listens, the lines around his eyes deeper and his shoulders slumped forward. He asks what happens if he refuses to cooperate, and Nora says honestly that we'd be on our own without federal protection, and Yates would eventually find us again. My mom reaches across the table and takes my dad's hand, and he looks at her for a long moment before nodding. He tells Nora he'll do whatever it takes to keep us safe, even if it means facing legal consequences for things he did 20 years ago, and I feel a weird mix of pride and sadness watching him agree to this. Nora pulls out paperwork and explains the process, and my dad signs documents while I sit on the bed trying to process that my father is officially cooperating with a federal investigation into his own crimes. The next morning, Nora comes back with Detective Carpenter, and they have a plan that makes my stomach hurt just hearing about it. They've been monitoring communications between the arrested associates, and they intercepted messages showing that Yates has been trying to make contact through intermediaries, wanting to negotiate or make threats or something. Detective Carpenter thinks they can use this to set up a controlled meet at a public location, specifically a bus depot downtown that has lots of cameras and witnesses. The plan is for my dad to be visible as bait, while Nora's team and Detective Carpenter's officers surround the location from multiple positions, and when Yates shows up, they'll arrest him with overwhelming force. My dad doesn't like this plan at all and says it's using him as a target, but Nora points out that he's already a target, and this way they control the environment. Detective Carpenter adds that they've studied the bus depot layout and have officers positioned to cover every exit, and they'll have sharpshooters on nearby roofs in case things go wrong. My mom asks what happens if Yates doesn't show up or sends someone else instead, and Nora admits that's a possibility, but the intelligence suggests Yates wants to handle this personally. I'm listening to them plan this operation, and I realize they're talking about deliberately putting my dad in danger to catch someone who wants to kill him, and even though I understand the logic, it feels wrong. My dad finally agrees, but only after making Nora promise that my mom and I will be somewhere completely secure during the operation, and she guarantees we'll be in a surveillance van with armed protection. The morning of the operation, I barely sleep because I keep imagining all the ways this could go wrong. We get picked up at 4 in the morning while it's still dark and drive to a location 3 blocks from the bus depot where the surveillance van is parked. Inside the van, there are screens showing video feeds from at least a dozen different cameras covering the depot from every angle, and 2 technical operators sit at the controls adjusting views and checking audio. My mom and I squeeze into the back area, and Nora gives us headsets so we can hear the radio communications between all the officers involved. I watch my dad on one of the screens as he walks into the depot at exactly 6:30 in the morning like they planned, and he's wearing a wire so we can hear everything he says. He looks scared but determined as he sits down on a bench near the ticket counter, and I'm gripping my mom's hand so hard my fingers hurt. The technical operator zooms in on my dad's face and I can see sweat on his forehead, even though it's cool outside, and my mom whispers that he's going to be okay. Nora's voice comes through the headset confirming that all positions are ready, and I count at least 8 different officers checking in from various locations around the depot. At 6:45, a man walks into the depot, and I know immediately it's Yates, because my dad's whole body goes tense on the screen. Yates has 2 other men with him, and they approach my dad slowly, and I can see Yates saying something that makes my dad's face go white. The audio from my dad's wire picks up Yates speaking in English with a thick accent, saying something about how my dad should have stayed dead. Then everything happens at once because Yates pulls a gun from inside his jacket, and my mom is screaming into the radio and shots are fired. Multiple officers converge from different directions, and I'm watching the screens trying to see where my dad is through all the chaos. One officer goes down holding his shoulder and there's blood on the ground, and I watch my dad drop flat with his hands over his head exactly like they trained him. The two men with Yates get tackled by officers and go down hard, but Yates himself somehow breaks away and runs toward the crowd of panicked travelers. More shots are fired and people are screaming and running in every direction, and the camera views keep switching trying to track Yates through the confusion. He disappears into a maintenance corridor and two officers chase after him, but when they come back out 30 seconds later, they're alone. Nora swears and grabs her radio demanding status updates from every position, and the responses confirm that Yates got away somehow. The scene at the depot is chaos with officers everywhere, and paramedics working on the wounded officer and travelers being interviewed by police. My dad gets handcuffed and led toward an unmarked car, and Nora explains through the headset that he's being taken into federal custody, both for his own protection and for questioning. I watch through the van window as they put him in the car, and even though I know this is part of the plan and necessary for his safety, it feels like I'm losing him all over again. My mom is crying quietly next to me, and I put my arm around her shoulders, and we sit there watching the screens as the depot slowly gets cleared and secured. The wounded officer is alive and talking to the paramedics, which is good news, but Yates escaping means we're still not safe. Nora climbs into the back of the van with us and apologizes for how the operation went, and I can see she's frustrated and angry about Yates getting away. She promises that every law enforcement agency in the region is now looking for him, and with his face all over the news and his associates arrested, he won't be able to hide for long. Detective Carpenter arrives at the van an hour later with updates about the arrests and the charges being filed. The two men who came with Yates are both in custody and already asking for lawyers, and the wounded officer is in stable condition at the hospital with a shoulder wound that should heal completely. They recovered Yates's gun from the scene along with shell casings and other evidence, and Detective Carpenter says the forensic team is processing everything to build the strongest possible case. He's coordinating with federal prosecutors to file charges against all the arrested attackers, and they're working to link everything back to Handler Tyson's murder through phone records and forensic evidence. It's not perfect justice because Yates is still out there somewhere, but at least most of his team is off the streets. Nora tells us the case is strong enough that the prosecutors expect most of the arrested people will take plea deals rather than risk trial, which means they'll probably testify against each other and provide more evidence. My mom asks what happens to us now, and Nora says we'll stay in protective custody while they continue hunting for Yates and processing my dad's cooperation agreement. I lean back against the van wall and close my eyes, and I'm exhausted and scared, but also relieved that at least some of the people who tried to kill us are locked up now. Nora makes phone calls for the next hour while we sit in the van, and I can hear her talking to judges and federal prosecutors about protective orders and custody arrangements. She gets approval for an emergency order that bars anyone connected to the Serbian organization from coming within 500 feet of my mom or me, and she explains this means if they violate it, they get arrested immediately regardless of other charges. The wounded officer is stable at the hospital, and his shoulder injury should heal completely according to the paramedics who updated Nora, which makes me feel slightly less guilty about this whole mess. Nora arranges for us to move to a secure apartment while they continue investigating and hunting for Yates, and she promises this place will be better than the motels we've been hiding in. We drive to a medical facility where my mom finally gets her ankle properly examined by a doctor who says it's badly sprained but not broken. They wrap it in a stiff brace and give her crutches, and watching my mom struggle to stand on one leg makes everything feel more real somehow. We sit in the quiet exam room after the doctor leaves, and my mom just starts crying, these deep, shaking sobs that scare me more than the guns did. She apologizes for all the years of lies and for not preparing me better for the possibility our cover could get blown, and I don't know what to say, so I just hold her hand and let her cry. She keeps saying she thought we'd be safe forever, and she wanted me to have a normal childhood, and I tell her I understand, even though I'm still angry about the secrets. Later that day, Nora shows us a news article on her phone about producer Gemma issuing a public statement. Gemma talks about the documentary's unintended consequences and announces Netflix is implementing new protocols for protecting witness identities in archived footage. She also agrees to blur additional identifying details in our footage and remove all location metadata from future airings of the episode. It doesn't undo the damage, but at least it might prevent this from happening to other families, and I appreciate that Gemma took responsibility instead of making excuses. That night, Nora drives us to our temporary apartment, which is in a bland building with security cameras and locked entry doors. The apartment itself has basic furniture and feels sterile like a hotel room, but it's clean and quiet and nobody's trying to kill us here. Nora sits down at the kitchen table with us and explains the logistics of getting new identities and relocating to a different region. This time she asks me what kind of place I'd like to live and what I want to study in the school, treating me like I actually have some control over my future. I tell her I want to live somewhere with actual seasons and maybe near a college so I can take classes eventually, and she writes this down like my preferences actually matter. The next morning, Nora sets up a monitored video call with my dad, who's being held in some federal facility. His face appears on the laptop screen and he looks tired and older, wearing an orange jumpsuit that makes everything feel more serious. He apologizes without making excuses for his past crimes or for keeping secrets from me my entire life. I tell him I need time to process everything, but I don't want to lose contact with him completely, and we agree to rebuild trust slowly with clear boundaries about honesty. He asks if my mom is okay, and I tell him about her ankle and the brace, and I can see him wince even through the video screen. We only talk for 15 minutes because Nora says that's the limit, and when the call ends, I feel drained but also slightly better than before. Detective Carpenter calls Nora that afternoon with updates about the arrested attackers. Bail was denied for all of them due to flight risk, and the severity of charges including conspiracy to commit murder. Alex Yates is still at large but now has federal warrants, and every law enforcement agency in multiple states is actively hunting for him. Carpenter says they're also investigating Yates's financial records and known associates to figure out where he might be hiding. My mom sits me down after Carpenter's call and admits she's been hiding the full extent of her training and capabilities because she wanted to believe we'd never need them. She tells me she worked for a private security company overseas before witness protection, and she knows how to do things she's never told me about. She promises complete transparency going forward about her skills, her past, and any potential threats we might face. I tell her that honesty is the only way we can function as a family now, and she agrees and squeezes my hand. We spend the next 2 days packing out our remaining belongings from storage units and scrubbing our digital footprint with help from a tech specialist the Marshals Service sent over. The specialist shows me how to delete my Instagram account properly and erase cached data and archived posts. I watch years of photos disappear from the screen as I click through the deletion process, and it feels like saying goodbye to a version of myself that never really existed in the first place. All those pictures of Lee Lane at the school events and birthday parties and casual moments, all of it was built on lies and now it's just gone. The specialist also helps us close email accounts and remove our information from various databases, and by the end of the second day, it's like Lee Lane never existed at all. On the 5th morning, I wake up in the secure apartment and find Nora making coffee in the kitchen. She calls me Madison for the first time instead of Lee, asking if I'm ready to start the relocation process. I take a deep breath and say yes. And I realize that even though I'm scared and angry and grieving for my old life, I'm also still here and still fighting. My mom is alive and my dad is safe in custody, and most of the people who tried to kill us are locked up. Yates is still out there somewhere, but we survived this far, and that has to count for something. Nora pulls out paperwork for our new identities and starts explaining the next steps, and I force myself to focus on her words instead of thinking about everything we're leaving behind. This is my life now, and I need to figure out how to live it, one decision at a time. And that's today's story. Thanks for listening. It really means a lot to know you're on the other side of the screen. I hope it brought a smile or two. Subscribe if you'd like to keep building these moments together.